participating, and at the same time, learn as much as possible and share. So this conversation is going to be a two-way traffic thing. It's going to be very busy. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be really fun. So once again, my name is Caroline. We'll bring you into plenary session 1, which is very interesting. The title of this plenary session 1 is called The Education Industry, Age of the Customer. So the moderator, this is a brief introduction as we invite our moderator up on screen very shortly, is someone who's been working in digital space for 10 years. So after 10 years, hi, okay, he's here on screen with us. He's got a lovely smile. It's good to see everybody smiling and happy. Just tahan a little bit and let me introduce you a bit. All right, so we know what's going to happen next. Okay, so our moderator, after 10 years of working in digital space, he moved towards developing communities, especially in rural areas. And we're talking about Battambang in Cambodia and also in Sabah. I love Sabah. I miss Sabah. Hopefully we can travel soon, yeah? Okay, Sabah is a very, very nice place. I'm yet to go to Cambodia. Maybe after this, you can share with us how is it like that. And for the last 7 years, our moderator has taken a journey to grow and build community towards sustainability and regeneration. So he is currently, listener, the co-founder of Wiki Impact. Wow, isn't that awesome? It is a research and collaborative platform for change makers and built to last. Also, a training and development organization for rural youth in Sabah. So, boleh bah kalau kau kan boleh saja, we must be baku sikit lah kan. He is passionate about creating positive outcomes in lives and communities. You can see his face, all that positive aura, it's oozing of positivity, right? The good kind of positive, not the negative positive that we're talking about. So we know, you know, I know. All right. And we believe in the power that one person can make a difference. So let's put our hands together and welcome our moderator who will be bringing in the speakers for plenary session 1. It's none other than Terence, co-founder of Wiki Impact. Over to you, Terence. Enjoy. Have fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Caroline. Good morning, everyone. Such a great honor, great privilege to participate in this conference. Greetings from the land beneath the wind. For me, it's the most beautiful state in Malaysia. I'm in Kota Kinabalu, Sabah right now. The second most beautiful state is Penang, and I have to say that because my dad is from Penang, right? So I'm Terence, and as mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Wiki Impact. We are an online platform that shares data and stories about issues that matter to you, to Malaysians. So we connect on our platform. You can check out wikiimpact.com or on our Instagram, Wiki Impact. We connect change makers and contributors on the ground so that as they seek towards making a difference wherever they are. I just want to acknowledge before we start, and I bring in the panelists, the great work of the organizers in ensuring that we have a smooth 2 days conference, right? So thank you to Joey and the team, really all of you working behind the scenes. Can we just show them a bit of love by tapping on the reaction button, right? Just so thank you, all of you. So we are here because in some way or another, we're passionate about education, right? We heard the keynote speaker and the two speakers at the start, whereby COVID-19 really disrupted education on an unprecedented scale, right? So globally, some facts and data for you guys. Globally, 90% of students were locked out of their classrooms by mid-April 2020. Right, that's an incredible number. 90% of students were actually locked out in April 2020. Some closures lasted several months. For us in Malaysia, if you look at this chart, ladies and gentlemen, we had 37 full weeks of closure, maybe not something we should be proud of, and 11 weeks of partial closure. That makes us one of the highest in the world. Can you believe that, right? Maybe even if you look at like countries like India, who was really ravaged by the pandemic, and even US, right? It's not, Malaysia is one of the highest, right? Maybe just behind Philippines, Indonesia put together, right? The impact on learning, mental health, socioeconomic situation of families really fell greatly. This has caused many stakeholders to review, just like all of you on this call, and to initiate reform changes to make schools, to make education more efficient, more equitable, and more flexible, right? So my son just completed his exams, and this morning he was just updating me about his course before I came into the room to get on this call. And it was so amazing because exams now are so flexible, right? You don't really need to be in a space where the teacher is invigilating, but of course there are certain parameters, right? So today I have the great honor to have three distinguished guests with us. They represent various voices, various expertise who will share and perhaps challenge us to take on this mantle of a reformist towards education in our household. And I repeat that line again, just that mantle of a reformist, right? To take change towards education in our household, in our schools, in the community. And really, I hope by the end of this session and the next 2 days, we'll be motivated, right, to consider alternatives to education and in our various spheres of influence. So I'm going to get them to introduce themselves, but very quickly, before we continue, I'd like to take two quick poll questions, right, concerning your experience. Some of you are parents, some of you are educators, some of you are just different personnels involved in education in our country. So two questions, right? I think it's on screen. You go to menti.com and you key in this 8-digit number that appears on the screen. And there will be two questions. The first question is rate your online experience during the last 18 months. Okay. So 1 being very poor and 5 being excellent. So how was your experience? You can be a parent, you can be a student, you can be just anybody, you can be an educator, you can be a leader in the sphere. And the second question is this. We'll come back to responses shortly, but the second question is this. As a parent, a guardian, or an educator, or a lecturer, or whoever you are, right? Researcher, can you share a memorable online learning experience during the lockdown? Okay, it can be either a positive or a negative one. So once you completed the first question, you'll go to the next one. And can you just type it out, right? And we'll review these responses shortly. So I really encourage all of you to respond to this. So as you do that, I'm going to invite the three panelists, great ladies, very influential in their spheres, to introduce themselves. So over to you, Dr. Sam, then followed by Beverlyn, and then followed by Azlina, right? Over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Chan Siok Yi, but you can call me Sam. Okay, I am a Program Quality Subcommittee Chair representing the Melaka Action Group for Parent in Education. Besides being a parent, I'm also an academician and a researcher in USM. And I would like to thank the organizing committee, Penang Institute, in hosting this meaningful dialogue and make the voices of different parties heard. Over to you, Beverlyn.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Beverlyn, and I'm an A-levels biology teacher from Charterhouse, Malaysia. So I have been in this education field for about 10 years plus now, and looking at various different factors involving education. My passion lies towards bringing education to every child, quality education to every child. Over to you, Azlina. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Azlina Kamal. I'm the education specialist in UNICEF in Malaysia. And as you know, UNICEF is a rights-based organization. So we work to not just improve learning outcomes for children, but especially looking towards the rights of education, particularly for the most marginalized children. So looking forward to talking to all of you.
Thank you so much, panelists. I'm really excited for this conversation, and I think everybody on this call feels the same. I'm just going to share with you a couple of stats, data points of where Malaysia is today. Some of you may or may not know specifically, but maybe I just want to hone into that. And then we'll have this discussion on this topic, right? So if I can have the slides on the screen, you'll be able to see the first one. Right? The second slide. Yeah. So based on this survey, so a plug for Azlina, right? I'm using some of the data points from UNICEF Malaysia. They released 4 issues of this research titled "Families on the Edge." If you've not checked it out, I recommend you to check it out, right? It surveyed 500 households among urban poor in Malaysia on different issues, including mental health, including education, including socioeconomic level and status, right? So you see here that in the 4th issue, which was published in May, majority of parents want their children to return to school, right? And the main reason is because there is no space to study at home, right? 50% face that. Anybody feels the same? Because I will be the first to raise up my hand. There is incredibly no space and this, we are talking about suburban, urban areas, right? Imagine in the PPR flats where it's about 600 square feet, 500 square feet, 700 square feet. It's gonna, it's difficult, right? And next. And online learning poses a challenge to households as most have to rely on smartphones for home-based learning. Majority of these urban poor children who are studying online are using their mobile phone or their parents' mobile phone to study. And how many of you know that is incredibly difficult? It's not impossible, but it's just difficult. And that's 88%. Only 29% owns a laptop, like what I'm using now, and only 5% owns a tablet. I particularly know of a family in a PPR flat who is a single mom, has 4 children, and the only device she has is her phone. So from morning at 7 until 1, they use the phone to take turns to go on class, and then the mom will resume work because she's a home baker at 1 o'clock and start replying messages. So it's really difficult. So this with regards to devices. Next. Not only parents find online classes challenging, children also feel the same way, right? If you see children lack focus in study, and many say yes, especially the female-led households, right? So it's even more challenged in households which are female-led and also disabled-led, right? Children have lost interest in study. I'll show you another data point shortly, where many children just do not attend school online at all, right? And next. Well, Education TV, I have to put that little screenshot there just to have some laughs, but and some of you know what I'm talking about. Like our DDET TV or the Edu TV is good. It has been a great addition to the students' learning, but it's not enough, right? Some say it's difficult for children to understand. Maybe the lingo, like I'm from Sabah, the kids here speak out a different lingo, and it's difficult to understand what the teacher, let's say, who were raised in Semenanjung speaks, and so on and so forth, right? And lastly, I think it's the last slide here. We talk about, next. We talk about several data points about more nationwide, a research of those Bumi Putra school students, right? And if you see the second line here, 24% of students attending online learning, they attended irregularly, 22% don't even show up. And you see that 2 lightning icon that I put there on the availability of digital devices and internet connectivity. Study found that 70% their internet were unstable, right? And the next line, 24% said that they had to share digital access with other family members, which could be linked to poverty faced by the Bifokli community. So here we see, thank you very much for those images. Here we see like students lack stamina. There's no proper gadgets, no tools to accommodate online learning, students feeling jaded, students feeling tired and fatigued, right? So with this, I think it's important to be aware, but also to be important. It's also important for us to strive forward, right? With this setting, I'm just going to invite Azlina, right, to maybe share with us on a short brief about reimagining education in this post-pandemic world. So Azlina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Terence. Give me a second to share my screen.
Great, we can see that.
Okay, wait. Right, let me, oh, sorry. You know what I just did? I went to the end instead of going to the front. Can you see your faces on my screen?
Yes.
Okay, this is what happened earlier, which I didn't realize. Okay, let me move everything, right? Okay, so I can't see anyone, Terence, so you need to kind of guide me as to what's happening on the ground because all I see is my screen. So
Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. I have tweaked it slightly, and I'm just going to go through it as a series of provocations, also talking about the different possibilities. So I thought it would be more helpful to also contextualize it that way. And I think while we've talked a lot about the challenges of COVID, and there are lots of challenges, and I'll also go through some of those very quickly. I think it is also given us an opportunity to look at how we can transform education systems so that we build resilience in our education system, right? And so very quickly, just to highlight, we talk a lot about the challenges as a result of COVID. The truth is there was already a learning crisis even before COVID, right? So COVID has just magnified and exacerbated those inequalities and all the issues with inclusion that we've had before, and quality as well. But it didn't mean, and I just wanted to contextualize that, right? So that we also realize these are things that were already prevalent even before. So we had issues related to access globally, learning and skills. So on one hand, we had children not having any access to education. On the other, when children were in school, 38% were not acquiring the minimum standards. We had 1 in 2 children with disabilities not accessing education. 90% of adolescents have never attended or dropped out in schools. And in high-income countries, almost 40% of them were still not accessing education. In Malaysia before COVID, we had, based on the study that we did on out-of-school children, we had 40,000 children dropping out annually, which translated to 186 students dropping out every day, which meant every child was dropping out every 2 minutes, right? And we know there's serious implications to this because 86.8% of occupations in Malaysia would require a minimum high school certificate. And so you have 40,000 children every year not being able to access almost 90% of occupations in Malaysia. And we know what will happen is like a vicious cycle. You have increased rates of crime, poverty, chronic illnesses, teenage pregnancy, early death. So all this was happening before COVID. And we highlighted all this in certain publications talking about out-of-school children, looking at childhood disability in Malaysia. We also did a study that was a precursor to the Families on the Edge, which was children without, looking at child poverty in urban areas, right? Now, what has COVID done? COVID has just blown everything out of the water. 1.6 billion children, their learnings were disrupted with school closures. 325 million of these children are in East Asia and Pacific. And in Malaysia, we know 5 million of children were impacted. So schools have been closed to almost 68 million children for over a year. Globally, in East Asia Pacific, 25 million. In Malaysia, again, 5 million. And 463 million children don't have access to remote learning, and 80 million of children in East Asia Pacific. I'll talk a little bit about the Malaysia situation. So what has COVID done? Is as I said, exacerbated all the issues and inequities. And also in terms of the regional losses, US 1 trillion losses in terms of lifetime earnings, which is equivalent to more than 5% of the region's 2020 GDP. Recent study by World Bank has estimated that the total cost of losses in terms of children's future earnings, in terms of social and also what they will earn, is at $10 trillion globally, right? So school closures and learning disruptions. I just wanted to show where are all the different, what are the different countries doing in terms of reasons for closure. Some are fully open, some are partially open. Ours has been closed for quite a number of months. And of course, we are looking at staged reopening. Now, what is the issue with school closures, right? So schools are microcosm of society. It is where children go to get all sorts of access besides learning. And we know that the most marginalized children will be the ones who are disproportionately more affected than other groups of children, because they rely on schools for a lot of other provision besides just learning. And for other children, in terms of learning, social skills, managing this entire community in school, all these skills, the child that could have been that child in future, if COVID had not happened, is going to be a very different child as a result of COVID, if we don't look at mitigating all these learning losses, right? So I just wanted to highlight that it's not just about learning when schools are closed. It is also about all other social and economic costs. And I just wanted to highlight the discourse is always, we need to close because of health reasons, we need to open because of economic reasons. But I think as a society, we need to ask ourselves, what is the educational argument, right? If we can open up entertainment centers, are we as a society saying entertainment is more important than education? Of course, there are risks to everything. Foucault, my favorite philosopher, talks about there is danger to everything. And our job is to weigh these ethical, political choices, which is the bigger danger, right? So I just wanted to highlight not having children in school far outweighs the danger than opening schools safely, right? Again, I wanted to just highlight very quickly, we had this averting a lost generation of COVID. Globally, we have deep inequalities and digital divide. And also it has, of course, made worse child poverty in a lot of poorer countries, and in terms of children accessing digital learning. The snapshot and situation in Malaysia, just to highlight on the right that with this digital divide, if you see at the bottom, no ownership at all of gadgets, 36.2% in urban areas and 35%. So there's this false conception that, oh, you know, in rural areas, it is everywhere, right? Now, what to prioritize very quickly, 6-point plan. We're looking at making sure all children learn, health, nutrition services, mental health, water sanitation in some of the countries and situations, environmental degradation, climate change, looking at child poverty, looking at conflict, disaster, and displacement. And displacement, especially when it comes to COVID in Malaysia, even you've got a lot of children having to move from the city, like parents have lost jobs, so they've gone back to their kampong, for example. Children are also internally displaced as a result of COVID, right? So what is the 3-point plan that we have in terms of reopening and recovery? We need to bring all children back to school again, trying to monitor which children are not coming back. We know so many children have been left to be orphans as a result of COVID. On top of all the mental health and poverty, we look at child deprivation. Who is this child in the middle of this pandemic who is poor, whose parents have lost their jobs, who may be disabled, who lives far away from school, whose school is not reopening, who doesn't have access to digital devices, who now has to take on roles of caring for younger siblings or having to work? So there are many layers and levels of deprivation. So when we talk about marginalization, the more deprivations a child has, the more difficult and challenging it is for the child to come back to school. And so how do we then remedy all this learning loss on top of all these issues that we talk about, mental health, nutrition, violence, all these things? How do we then reconfigure our curriculum and learning so that we get to catch up and look at remediation, and how do we empower teachers? So very quickly, these are some of the programmatic shifts. I can talk about this a bit more in the breakout room later, as well as the questions that you may have. So all these things will require, we have a deeper learning emergency, and so we need to look at strategies for different learners. When I talk about different learners, I'm not talking about needs, I'm also talking about levels and layers of marginalization earlier. These are some of the things UNICEF has done, so we welcome a lot of you to work with us. We've got lots of materials, publication at different stages of the pandemic, right up to how do we build resilience in the system, because this is not going to be the last shock in our education system. These are some of the things that we've worked on, and I will share this later in the breakout room as well. So what we're doing to mitigate this learning loss. Terence mentioned the families on the edge as part of our evidence-based advocacy, and also how are we reimagining education for every child. We're trying to make sure that systems are able to make sure children are ready for school at 5. They're able to succeed at 10, ready for transition to work at 18. And how do we do this? We need to look at comprehensive policy frameworks. How do we then look at inclusive systems, look at multiple pathways, because keeping in mind the different layers and levels of marginalization, right? Just giving devices to everybody is not going to work if there are other levels and layers of marginalization that will not work for this particular child. So looking at offline, looking at, how do we leverage certain communities, engage with them to make sure children learn. So we need to be able to look at hybrid and multiple pathways, making sure funding to education is not affected, and also in terms of how do we engage employers. So again, I will share this later, but just to say, I wanted to also end on a somewhat optimistic note to say that countries are taking up the challenge to respond and to use COVID as an opportunity. So these are we always need to focus on the most marginalized, because when we focus on the most marginalized children, they have the greatest level of deprivations. It becomes easier to then look at responses for other groups. I give you an example. We're looking at Delima platform, for example. There are issues with Delima access in terms of who has access to it, right? So for example, some of the things we're doing, we're working to extend the Delima platform to children in detention with prisons and Ministry of Education, for example. We're looking at making it more inclusive for children with disabilities for our future skills. So all the videos will have sign language interpretation. We're working with children on this as well, on co-creation, for example. So there are many things that we can do. We're looking at offline packs for different groups of undocumented indigenous street children, for example, right? So there are many things that we can do despite the enormous and insurmountable challenges. But these are the things I think we need to ask ourselves. How do we reach and include the most marginalized? How do we measure access, monitor learning achievements? How do we identify what works and scale them up? And how do we strengthen the system for sustainability? And UNICEF, of course, when we work with a lot of partners. We work with MOE, we work with AROS, we work with MDEC, we work with DIGI, we work with our CSO partners, universities. So we welcome collaborations from everybody. I will stop there. I know it's a bit fast, it's a bit like, but I just wanted to make sure that at least there is a snapshot of what's happening. Over to you, Terence.
Azlina, thank you so much for that comprehensive overview. A quick one. I think it zones in everybody to where we are today. I've heard you share this before, but each time when you share this, I'm just so thankful that there are people like you and many of our panelists, many of our speakers here for these 2 days who are so concerned, not just concerned, I think passionate is the word, right? To do something. And it's not just for our own children, but also especially for the children who are deprived of some of these facilities. So really thank you to all of you. Can I just get the admin to show the Mentimeter results that people were participating just now? And Azlina, I hope to answer some of those questions that you posed just now during this conversation. So I think that'll be really amazing. So is the first one, can we go back to the rating one, if it's possible? Yes, so how was everybody's experience? So I think in general, we are in the middle, right? From all the responses, some a bit more, some a bit less, but I think, okay, in general, we are feeling the young people will use meh, right? MEH, okay? But the next one, let's look at some of these responses, and then maybe I'll get Beverlyn and Dr. Chan to share. So how are some of your experiences, right? First one say using quiz to get kids excited. This sounds like a teacher. Positive, kids are amazing. They were sharing with each other how to use certain functions on Google Meet. This sounds like my child, right? Funny disruptions in the back when the children are studying. trust me, I've had so many whoops moment, right? It was a challenge to juggle between work and monitoring, guiding children's online learning. Their span of attention is short for online learning. Luckily, we have good, adequate gadget, right? Next. I'm just going on the left down, yeah? Is there anything else on the left portion? I'm from District Education Office. Sorry. Equipping students with the ability to think critically rather than challenging their memory power, equal education for all that is of good quality, and how we shouldn't have so many options for them. Really, that's true. I think we're going to talk about this a bit, right? Let's look at the top. Diversify education opportunities for people and no fear of discipline. I'm going to the right. I believe that the education system needs to go beyond just preparing students for their jobs. The country's education should be more than just exams, but actually engaging with students about knowledge and allowing students to be creative. Anyone agree with this statement? Can you just press the jam the reaction button? And maybe I just read one more, right? On the right, education is about opportunity. And I think Azlina mentioned that it can be gotten from all sorts of mediums, but is limiting education in the country the best thing to do, as this affects the whole society and their views on what actually education is? And holistic approach. Wow, thank you so much for responding to this. I think it gives a perspective of where everybody is. I'm just going to zone into both Beverlyn and also Dr. Chan as an educator, as a parent, right? How has your experience been, right, with our current education system? Maybe Beverlyn, you would like to take this first.
Hi. Thank you, Terence. So this has been an interesting time for educators, parents, and students alike. So as Azlina mentioned earlier, the gaps in education were already present pre-COVID, and now this pandemic has basically just magnified these issues. So as an educator, one of my biggest challenges was being removed from a classroom setting where I was able to walk around, gauge understandings, and even look at my students' faces and if they're concentrating in class, to see if they understand what's happening, and also to check their well-being as they walk into classes. So the online setting cut that off, and I struggled with motivating my students. Initially, I struggled with motivation with myself as well, to wake up every day and to sit in front of the laptop and to deliver my lessons. I remember the initial stage where there was a lot of helplessness among educators, unsure if we were getting through each child. The screen time still deems to be a challenge for most of us. However, this also pushed educators to get creative. I recalled lessons where I ran into my kitchen, grabbed ingredients from my pantry to demonstrate a scientific process. It allowed me to learn from my students, especially, I think one of the viewers mentioned just now, where students were teaching, to use certain applications and so on. It allowed me to flip the switch and use different apps to deliver lessons. It also made me check in more often on students' well-being, which sometimes in a classroom setting can be easily just deemed, as a normal thing that we don't really check on them. It encourages teachers to be innovative and proactive towards our students. And what I believe that currently, what I'm personally doing is to move away from the spoon-feeding culture. It's more of teaching each child to then rise up to, of course, with the many challenges, but to rise up to certain, things that are happening around them, or even in class. So in my opinion, the current state of our education system is a little scattered with the pandemic. We have not fine-tuned practices across schools. Conversations like these are important so we can come together to instill better rubrics to streamline the system. Thank you.
Thanks, Beverlyn. I just want to read a quick comment by someone on this chat, and she said that I recently taught a podcasting course to a 12-year-old to 12-year-old kids using free tools, and kids were able to produce their own 5-minute podcasts using the same free tools and a phone. We love that technology has lowered the barrier for exploration, experimentation, and learning. And that's brilliant, right? Like what you said, I like how you said running to the kitchen, finding probably the other day, my girl was learning how to why you should brush your teeth, and the teacher used eggs and ketchup and simple old toothbrush to demonstrate that. And I think kudos to teachers like yours who go out of the box and not limit yourself to the current circumstance. Let's hear from Dr. Sam. What has your experience been?
Thanks, Terence. I'm very happy to hear about Beverlyn being very creative teachers, because it's hard to find at this point of time. But due to the sudden lockdown, it is very normal that we are in the transition phase, or even havoc situation occurs sometimes. But based on my experience, there are a lot of resentment about education during this lockdown period. And it can be divided into a few categories, which is frustration. Okay, some of us, we are frustrated about not knowing what our kid is learning, or not even able to control the kids on their own seats in front of the screen. And realization is one of the things that Azlina has mentioned just now. It's actually exacerbate what the education system has already the crisis that has been happening well before the COVID. And of course, worried of access to education. Let me show you a little bit on what happenings to this when people are working from home. Okay, if you would like to see my wording, you can actually pin me. Working from home while schooling, and they have exacerbated parental stress. And 84% of parents reported high psychological impact, and also behavioral and psychological construct of these parents. And there is also reported anxiety, depression, as well as stress onto the parents. And not only to parents, let us look at the kids who has actually, okay, I'm trying to stay away from what Azlina has mentioned about this equality. Those who has actually those access to the education, even though we have good penetration of the internet, which is around 83% in 2020, and 36.9% of them do not have device. Okay, this is on their access to education, but how about their social and personal development? That is actually happening well before the COVID and also in the COVID. And I have my own experience with my own very own family, very close family, that because we previously, when we came from a very B40 kind of family, we think smartphone is a luxury. We don't think it is a necessity. Okay, when COVID hit, we still think and wait for the school to reopen, because the announcement of the lockdown is actually not long-term. It's telling you, we are going to close 3 months. Okay, 3 months is fine for a B40s to wait. Okay, and another 3 months is again fine, but it happens for 1.5 years up to now. And in the middle of around 6 months off, then I try to tell my family it is not a luxury anymore. It is a necessity. And we try to persuade and ask the sister or whoever to actually purchase those devices for the children. This is something very difficult for a family who are coming from B40. And let us look at what are some of the data on these children. And on children, you have also seen some mental health problem on anxiety, depression, and stress. This is a study on children itself. 45 children has actually answered the mental scale. And during this period of time, of course, you see child has actually externalizing their misbehavior during this lockdown. And of course, if you look at our PDBR structure, the structure that what the government has actually set on, that is, of course, to go back to previously before the COVID-19, we actually educated our students in the way how Beverlyn actually do for her students. We are kind of, I don't know, but I do not want to comment so much, but this is something that the teacher need to ponder about. Are we actually teach them how to fish in terms instead of actually feeding them? Okay, and of course, when we move into the higher education, because I'm from the higher educations, and you will see a lot of this class content is actually moving merely from physical to the screen. Okay, this is the lack of pedagogy design. Okay, and of course, the introduction of blended learning by the Ministry of Higher Education together with Ministry of Education is trying to integrate technology into this the teaching and learning during this lockdown time. And a study shows for adult learner in universities, they do like pre-recorded classes, which is asynchronous class, because this is again representing people can actually study anywhere, anytime, and of course in the future by anyone. Okay, and having said that, even though they like this asynchronous, which means they can actually learn anytime, anywhere, still there are 69.5 of this university students, this is on higher educations, felt overloaded. And what actually is lacking now, this is what we would like to actually highlight from our perspective, that what they felt, okay, they feel pressure of many online tasks, and of course limited internet. Those are infrastructure development that we need not a lot of partnership. But one simple things that teacher or even educator like myself can do is actually we can check again back to our own pedagogy. This is my experience, Terence.
Thanks, Dr. Sen, for that. Yeah, really, it's a good reflection point, right? What you mentioned, are we pre-COVID, how were we teaching them, right? And just like what Azlina mentioned, like our priorities for education, F&B or entertainment, right? So this really, hopefully this situation brings us to a point of reflection and also to reform education, starting from our own household and then to our community and the nation at large. I'm going to read a quick comment by Melissa in the chat. She said that the effects of students not going to school can be extrapolated to a country being a poor nation in the nearest future. And that's such a great point, because we oftentimes think about just us learning loss and everything, but actually for the nation as a whole, having school closures, it being a regressive approach can actually cause such danger for the nation. In the region. Azlina, I'm going to ask you this question, and also it's from the audience, right? There have been various efforts to improve online learning in terms of devices, internet infrastructure, bandwidth, and so on. Like I used to work next to the kampong. You know the story of that girl climbing the tree to get internet. Yeah, that's very close to where I used to work. And we see right away after that attention, different internet providers coming there, including TM to build the tower. And that's great, right? So what are some of the gaps and issues that you've observed? A question here from the audience is, what do you think should be done to make up for this learning loss as a result for school closure, whether nationwide or so? Yeah.
Thank you very much for that very good question. I think, as I talked about earlier, I'll give you an example first, and then I'll highlight the point, right? Mm-hmm. So say, for example, UNICEF, we're working on Delima, right? We know that Delima is only accessible for a particular group of mainstream children, right? So children with devices. Now, there is an opportunity to build that system, but then we say, how do we make this then inclusive for all children, right? So that what we don't do is we don't build parallel things and deplete our resources, right? We need to be focused. We need to come together. We need to build on what is there, make it better and most inclusive as possible. So say, for example, the example that we're doing, we say, for example, we know children need remediation and need to catch up, and the curriculum needs to be tweaked. so that we are more efficient with the time and the learning. So what we've done is we have this program called Global Citizenship Education, where we've actually realigned the national curriculum to the requirements of global citizenship education. And students look at issues and topics through a multidisciplinary lens, through math, science, history, geography, right? Because we don't have time. We don't have time to go through the curriculum the way we used to before had COVID not happened, right? So we need to be efficient. I give you another example. The materials that we put on Delima, we know that, say, for example, keeping in mind the levels of deprivation, we know that what about teachers outside the system? So we've put it on a public-facing part of Delima where teachers, if you're a refugee school teacher, if you're a teacher teaching an alternative learning center, if you're a parent interested in building your capacity as a remote online educator, everybody can have access to that material. We've used the Google accessibility features so that, and we also have even a module where we tell teachers how to use those features so that, either teachers or children with disabilities can also use it. For example, our Future Skills for All, we're now working with Malaysia Federation of the Deaf to kind of make the videos that we're doing more accessible and inclusive for children with disability. We're looking at expanding Delima for children in detention, working with Prisons Department and Ministry of Education. We're looking at offline packs for children who don't have access to internet. So there are many things that we can do, right? And I like the word challenge. The word challenge, if you remove a few letters, also becomes change. So the idea is to look, how can you change a challenge into meaningful change, for example. So, but some of the thing that we need to do, right, really in terms of, great that schools are being reopened. And it is absolutely critical that schools reopen because the data shows that schools are not vectors where infections are happening, right? And so if we open schools safely, then, children should be in schools learning. But what we need to do is, again, this is not just a government's responsibility. Education is everybody's business, right? This is the thing about collaboration. SDGs is all about partnerships and collaboration. So what we need to do is to come together. How do we plan, prioritize? Children are back in school. Now, when we see children are back in school, we then need to monitor who is not coming back, why are they not coming back, and how are for example, what are we going to do and build, like either community, school, district ability to build resilience so that children can come back, looking at a wider social protection framework as well. You can't keep telling parents, oh, you need your children to learn online if families are too poor. If at the end of the day, I need to decide whether I feed my children or my child goes online learning. So having a wider social protection framework where families can also make better decisions is important. The other is how do we make sure that children receive tailored and sustained remedial learning and comprehensive services to help them readjust and catch up. And I think Sam and Beverlyn talked at length about their own situations and how they've done this. Again, we need to look at digital inclusion, digital access. Are we effective? How do we look at, looking at entire frameworks of learning assessment, for example? How do we build teachers' capacity to be better online educators? So some of the most effective, I'll end very quickly, I know time is of the essence. Some of the most effective crisis recovery strategies we need to use as a basis for long-term improvements, right? We're not just doing this as a result of COVID. What we want to do is to reset. That's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to catch up so that we can all make sure that our children are able to, the child that has experienced COVID and all the deprivations as a result of COVID is going to be a very different child in terms of that child's life trajectory if the child had not experienced COVID. So we need to kind of make sure that we all come together to address that. So some of the things, like I mentioned, monitoring student dropout and disengagement, which is a big issue. Continued role of distance learning. How do we look at multiple delivery and also alternative and hybrid models? Plans for remediation and tracking the effectiveness. How do we look at the shifting role of learning assessment? How do we localize decisions on reopening schools? How do we measure effectiveness of health and safety measures, especially when children are in school? How do we look at 21st century skills development and support to teachers, which includes psychosocial support to well-being and mental health? So these are, I think, opportunities. And again, at the heart of all this, prioritizing the most marginalized children.
Thanks, Azlina. I think thanks for reminding us that I think all of us really plays such a key role in shaping education. It's not just the government or a teacher's job. Beverlyn, I'm just going to pose this question to you. It came from the audience, and you being a science teacher and being involved in science for years, right? How open are you with maximizing the role of arts in education, visual learning becoming apparent during this time? Do you think creativity can be inculcated in our system? And I think when we chatted offline, right, and we say that Malaysia, we tend to focus a lot on sciences and tend to focus on it's like, there's another question that says like standardizing education. Because at the end of the day, we are not trying to generate factory workers. So why do we standardize education, right? So I wonder what your take is on that, Beverlyn.
All right. Thank you, Terence. So the current blueprint for IR 4.0 instills the importance of STEM subjects. So even though we have, if you have noticed, there is a decline towards these subjects in recent years. The rollout for equipping schools with proper digital labs are happening, but this may not necessarily reach areas with set groups of students. And what I'd like to, throw back is, are we thinking about each child and the challenges they face with lack of connectivity or devices? In order to bring in arts, as a science teacher, I'm very into this, and therefore I would talk about design thinking later on how we collaborate different multidisciplinary subjects and how we come together to allow this child to think not only in a science-based manner, but to open up possibilities for them to get creative. So to me, the idea currently, the way COVID has, taken over the world, is to look at, of course, all these challenges that we are facing, but at the same time, to use this opportunity to now use different platforms to grow as well and to support each child in terms of the arts and humanities, especially in our country. So I would say that each child should be given the opportunity to express themselves and to cultivate creativity and be more open to take on humanities and arts. And it is through these core subjects that a child's creativity and personality can be developed as well.
Brilliant. And I think so important to think of a child as a whole child, right? And it's not just like one side of the brain that we focus on in developing that child. So, teachers, educators, leaders, right? When we plan our programs, when we plan our lessons, right? When we school our children, right? All these different facets would need to be incorporated. And I think maybe just a quick shout out to your breakout room. If those who are interested in something about design thinking and all can hop onto Beverlyn's breakout room after this. Maybe the organizers can just put out the mentee question, the next question that I want everybody to participate, it being what should a country's education system achieve? And let's look at some of the responses here. They said that equipping students with the ability to think critically rather than challenging their memory power, right? And how many of us can memorize all the nilai moral, right? Sit for exams. Equal education for all, that is of good quality, and how we shouldn't have so many options. I agree. Create a future-ready workforce, and that's your school, right? Charterhouse, Beverlyn. Preparing students for the future, an inclusive curriculum, holistic approach, allow home-based education, alternative assessments. I'm reading a comment also from a viewer, and says that incorporating mindfulness, mental health as topics that we should cover, flexibility. Right, as part of the education system. Maybe I just want to get comments from Dr. Sam and Azlina about this, right? One being one as a parent, as a teacher, and the other one being someone in the education field in a larger point of view. Some of these comments are perhaps not necessarily what does the system need to achieve, but it's more like criteria or pillars. But what do you think, like in a larger scheme of things, what should the education system of a country achieve? Maybe Dr. Chan, over to you first.
Okay, thanks, Terence, for the question. As the parents, I think many parents come from various backgrounds. The essence of education, if we look at it, we need to understand from the beginning why this education system exists. Okay, and if you look into the philosophy of why education is there for our country itself, of course, is for nation building, right? But okay, having said that, education is not exclusively nation building. If we need to shift from one to another until today, IR 4.0, it is no longer 3M, no longer read it, menulis, membaca, and mengira. It is about communication, creativity, let me see, communication, creativity, and also there's another 2 C's. Let me check if I have. Yeah, and you know what the thing is. Malaysian education blueprint has already stated this clearly, that they are looking at developing, the future generation, which is holistic. Okay, so where is our gap actually lies on? Actually, when we have the reality and also this ideal condition mismatch, actually you may want to check again back on your actions. This is what I think this is currently lacking. It is not to say that our system did not design. We designed it, okay, as a tertiary education educator. We design creativity, we design leadership, we design communication in the curriculum itself. But I'm not sure how many of us has really assessed or successfully inculcate this quality into our generations. Again, all of this is again back to the pedagogy, which I will encourage everyone to actually enter Beverlyn classroom just to see how things can be designed better.
Thanks, Dr. Sam. I'm just reading a couple of comments on your point. Melissa says to redesign the current curriculum that centers on community, on community engagement and a sense of belonging. Kenny mentioned that, it's a misconception that being an artist or musician doesn't always secure a stable income. I agree with that. Haley mentioned that, it's impossible to be an effective scientist or engineer without creativity. It's so true, right? Creativity, persuasion, collaborative, adaptability, some of these key points. How about you, Azlina? Like, what should a nation's education system achieve at large?
If you want the short of it, I will say we should look at producing global citizens, right? I think global citizenship to me is increasingly an over-encompassing concept, right? So within that, and of course, a lot of people will say it's the Christmas tree SDG indicator because it has different elements of different things in that. Because it also looks at all the things that we talked about, right? It looks at values, attitudes, behaviors, looking at responsible global citizenship, looking at creativity, innovation, commitment to peace, human rights, sustainable development. So it helps our young people to understand issues and how everything is interconnected, right? So while and also to be able to look at issues critically, through a multidisciplinary view rather than all this archaic way, like, oh, what is this? Oh, for geography, is this? You need to kind of develop thinking skills because that's how we deal and look at issues in real life, to be aware of social justice, inequities. I think these are different dimensions. So you want to kind of activate the cognitive, socio-emotional, behavioral elements. And I think really good education system understand the value of this. I think we constantly talk about, mental, physical. We constantly talk about holistic development, but I think, and we've been one of the early adopters on this, but I think how do we make it concrete? And I think global citizenship education is one way of doing that. And we've been working on this since 2017. in terms of realigning the curriculum, we're going to continue and have from pre-primary right up to lower secondary. And with pre-primary, we're even looking at realigning it to our indigenous communities. So the KSPK, which is the preschool curriculum, but we're also going to introduce elements of how our different indigenous communities. So you want children who are rooted in a strong sense of their own identity and culture, but wide enough and open enough to understand issues globally as well. So.
Yeah, thanks, Azlina. I'm just going to wrap this conversation up as we approach to time. Maybe Dr. Sam, I'll bring in a question by one of the audience, right, about race, ethnicity, different socioeconomic status affecting students, right? How can we address this in Malaysia? And we talk about the orang aslis, the stateless, the refugees, the undocumented, and so on. And Malaysia moving forward to, we call it SPV 2030, IR 4.0. How do you think this would look like in the coming days?
Thanks, Sarah, for the question. As you know, Malaysia has this Shared Prosperity Vision 2020, which to provide a decent standard living for Malaysians by 2020. So the way forward should be democratized education. Means everyone can have actually access to the education. One of the way that this higher education has done is actually massive open online learning course. Okay. However, it is very dependent on motivation, perceived effectiveness, and also self-efficacy. If you look back into our previous primary and secondary education, if we did not use Beverlyn method into teaching them on self-efficacy, this wouldn't be effective, I would say. Okay, because you need to have self-directed learning in order to attend all those massive online learning course. But there is another way, which is we need to go into the partnership globally. Okay, need to have a mutual recognition, certification, bite-sized learning, and micro-credential. Something like, if you know about Uber, when the Grab is not yet in, Uberization is like Uberization of this education. You deliver the education to everyone in their vicinity or near to them. Okay, one of this community that have worked with us was, I'm not sure if you know about City Foundation. They have done something very incredible. They collect number of teachers and collect numbers of students that do not have good access to education, and they become the middleman to match this demand. Okay, and this is what a concept of Uberization is there. So I think way forward, like what Azlina said, global citizenship about education, this is what we should look into. And how about this recognition? As I said, the mutual recognition then will be the MOA between different partners, and how this employer is actually recognize the digital badge. Because at the end of the day, they will be no longer a student that is carrying a Oxford University degree or Harvard. They are carrying their own profile that they have graduated from the different credential by the different universities. So what we need to work on is actually realign our thought. Are we open to this? And this is what if this is so ideal can be done. Now the question has to throw back all the parents. Are you there for not sending your student to university or school, but having this credential micro-learning among them?
Wow, thanks so much, Dr. Sam. I think it's between like what you're saying here is a degree versus a micro degree in that sense, or a profile, and that's something thought-provoking, but at the same time, I can see that being adopted in the years to come, right? That your degree of being specialized in, say, accounting might not carry so much weight as someone who had multiple. So Beverlyn, maybe over to you to close us up with the discussion on that same question.
Okay, thanks, Terence. So I would still go back to saying that first, educators across the nation need to be trained better to cope with technology advancement, which is taking over. So we have moved into this era of digitalization, and not many educators are on board with this due to many possible factors. There could be problems with connection, no devices, no tools, lack of interest, or even just being really comfortable with the traditional teaching methods. So in my opinion, the order towards moving towards IR 4.0 was given by MOE. It was heard by teachers, but the question here is, has it been carried out with a proper place in a proper plan in place? And when we think about these things, are we just merely delivering lessons for the sake of doing so, just to finish the day off, just by introducing some technology? And these are basically things that we need to think about going back into the classroom after this whole COVID situation. When we get back into classroom, how are we still going to incorporate technology and use it in a very effective manner? So I think the delivery is important, but at the same time to think about equipping a child to then go into multidisciplinary actions and so on. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Beverlyn, for that response. Thank you, everyone, right, for lending your ear to this discussion. I think it's been, we can talk till another hour or so, I guess, because it's such a important topic, but also something that holds very dear to all of us. I just want to say thank you to Azlina, Dr. Chan, Beverlyn, for your opinions, your comments, your challenges, and thank you to everyone. I'm going to pass this time back to the organizing, to Caroline, the MC, but can I just quickly read a quote by Paulo Freire that was mentioned by our keynote speaker, and this quote comes from the book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, that was also mentioned. He said that there is no such thing as neutral education. Education either functions as an instrument to bring about conformity or freedom. So you cannot be neutral. You cannot stay at where you are, but it has to function for an instrument to either want to create people that look like you, or you want to create freedom. Thank you very much, everybody, and hope to see some of you in the breakout room in the next 2 days.
Thank you, Terence.
All right. Thank you, Terence. And also, once again, a big thank you to all our speakers. That was really a very interesting conversation. We've learned a lot. And at the same time, not only must we thank our moderator, Terence, and also our speakers, but also the participants, because you guys really rock it. I can see really participating, really sharing out or pouring out your views, your opinion, and this is what matters. So keep up the momentum, and we will keep this going until tomorrow, because there are more interesting topics to look into. And following this first plenary session, we will go into the breakout session.